They don't understand what cybersecurity is. To go a little more specific, they're solving the wrong problem. If you are thinking the problem is X and you are solving X, but the problem is Y and you don't know it's Y and you're ignoring Y, what's going to happen? Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, 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 welcome. You know what time it is. It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly. Dr. E is in the house. And what I really want to cover on this episode is one of the most fundamental problems that I see happening in organizations, which is they don't understand what cybersecurity is. To go a little more specific, they're solving the wrong problem. If you are thinking the problem is X and you are solving X, but the problem is Y and you don't know it's Y and you're ignoring Y, what's going to happen? Exactly what is happening in cybersecurity today. You're going to have frustrated executives, you're going to have frustrated board members, you're going to have frustrated people in the organization, and most importantly, you're going to have a very, very frustrated Chief Information Security Officer because they're putting all this energy and effort into a problem, and because they're fixing the wrong problem, they're not getting the results that they want, which is creating exactly what we're seeing in cyber today. This has been an area I've been studying for a while because it's interesting. Most areas, if you identify it as a problem, you fix it and you move on. But cyber is one of those that companies continue struggling with. It's interesting. If you go back, and I did this over the last 5 years, and you look at top companies each year, what are their top 3 biggest problems in business? And often something will appear on the list, and then it'll get fixed, and it's no longer on the list. Cyber is one of the only areas that I know of that have been on the list consistently year after year after year after year, because it's not only not getting fixed, but it's getting worse and worse and worse. And it's frustrating because companies are putting more money and more resources and more budget, and not only is the problem not getting fixed, not only is the problem not staying the same, but the problem is getting worse year after year. So just imagine the frustration factor. If you have a problem or an issue in your life and you're putting money, energy, and effort against it, and despite the money, energy, and effort you're putting against it, it continues to get worse and worse and worse. At some point, you're going to be like, what is going on? Now, the good news is there's a solution, but it requires you to take a different role as a CISO. And that is a leadership role where you have to build up the rapport, you have to build up the trust, but then you have to walk into the boardroom and say, listen, the reason why we struggle with cyber, the reason why we continue to spend money, energy, and effort is because of a very simple principle. We have grouped and put cybersecurity in the same category as IT, and therefore we've treated it as a technical problem, and we try to solve it as a technical problem. But the reality is, my friends, it's not a technical problem. It's a business problem. And until we act behave and treat it like a business problem, we are going to continue to struggle and continue to have difficulty. And the issue is most CISOs either don't understand that because they come from a technical background and they understand technology and they think it's a technical issue, or the few CISOs that I know of that do know and recognize it's a business problem, because they've sold it as a technical problem for too long, they no longer have the trust, the rapport with the executives for them to have the difficult discussion that needs to have. And these are the discussions that I often have with executives all the time. Is I walk and I go, listen, this is not criticism. This is not pointing the fingers. This is not saying any blame. The CISO you had did the best job they could based on the resources, the environment, and how you structured them. But the reality is this. If you are putting your CISO under the CIO, which I am shocked in this year that companies still do, there is no way they can be successful. They could survive. They could give the illusion of success, but on basic fundamental principles, which I'll explain in a minute, it is impossible. It is impossible for a CISO who reports to a CIO to thrive, be successful, be world-class, and help the organization at the level that they need to. And the reason is simple. CIOs, just so we're clear, CIOs are not malicious. They're not evil. They're not trying to hurt the organization. I sat on a panel once where it was me and 3 CIOs, and the discussion was whether a CISO should be under the CIO. And as I'm going, the CIO is like, Eric, we are not dishonest, evil people. You're painting us out like we're trying to maliciously hurt the organization. I said, no, you're missing the point. You're doing your job. But your job as a CIO makes it impossible for you to truly focus 100% on security. I said, simple reason. CIOs, what are they bonused on? What are they promoted on? What are they weighed on? What is their metric that they have to achieve every year to keep their job? Uptime availability. Most CIOs at mature companies do 5 nines. 99.999% uptime availability. So I looked at the CIO and I said, is that true? They said, yes. So let me ask you a question. Are you going to, on a regular basis, deliberately do things that are going to hurt uptime availability? They said, no. I said, could we go so far to say that'd be crazy? Right? Your job is uptime availability. It's a technical problem. If a server crashes and you have uptime availability issues, what do? Put in redundancy. So now if a server goes down, you have multiple servers in place. If your internet goes down, what do? You buy more internet. It's technical. I'm not trying to say it's a simple job. I respect CIOs more than most people realize because I've been a CIO in the 90s when it wasn't easy. But what I will tell you is once you understand and know the environment and you get your redundancy principles in place and you understand redundancy fail time, it's basically a math problem that you can solve. And if you're missing your target, you solve it by buying more technology and setting up the infrastructure correctly. IT is a technical problem that's solved with technology and proper redundancy. Well, here's the issue. There are cases now more and more where security could impact uptime availability. You very well could have a situation where the executives have to make the decision, do we impact uptime availability to minimize a major attack against the organization? Those two sometimes contradict. Here's the problem. If the CISO is buried under the CIO and the CIO's charter and survival mechanism plan is uptime availability, they are not malicious, they are not deliberate, they are doing their job and they're doing their job extremely well, but they are going to make decisions based on what they know, which is uptime availability. And therefore, security is at some point going to suffer in the organization. Whether we like it or not, we have to recognize that while IT and security can work together, they are equals, and they sometimes are going to disagree. And if one reports to the other, it creates a conflict. So that's why you can't have a successful CISO long-term that reports under the CIO. They have to be equal. Or because IT is one of the three areas of security, they really, if we did this correctly, if we went back from any logical standpoint and tried to design an org chart for an organization, in any reasonable organization, you would have the CISO as one of the core five. You would have CEO, COO, CFO, CISO, and Chief Legal Counsel. And then under CISO, you would have risk. Under CISO, you would have IT. Under CISO, you'd have privacy. Under CISO, you'd have security. And because there's so many subsets that fall under that umbrella, that is the more logical way of doing it. But because organizations don't understand it, you create these very bizarre, screwed up org charts where it's like the CISO is buried under the CIO, and then risk is over here, but then assurance. It's like, what do you, I mean, the probability of success is insane, right? It's almost zero. So we have to step back and recognize that IT is valuable, a CIO is critical, but they are focused on technology, and it's a technology problem. Cyber is not. You are not going to be able to write a check and solve cybersecurity, because the reason is simple. Cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating risk of critical assets being disclosed, altered, or denied access. That is a business problem, because you have to decide as a business, what risk are you willing to take? The question, what is our risk tolerance? What is the acceptable level of risk we are willing to allow for our organization? Cannot be solved by writing a check. It cannot be solved by buying more infrastructure. It can only be solved by executives saying, we are or we are not willing to accept this. We are or we are not willing to accept the value or benefit that we're getting versus the risk or exposure. And the reality is, it's not hard. But the problem is that for too long, we had two major issues. One that I've already addressed is CISOs are buried under the CIO. Doesn't work. Before I move on, I'll ask the million-dollar question that I always get asked. So Eric, are you saying that if I'm a new CISO, I've never been a CISO before, I'm looking for my first job, and at this company, the CISO reports to the CIO, are you saying I should not take that job? No. What I'm saying is, recognize the reality that your probability for long-term success, unless that organizational structure changes, is very low. However, if you want to get the CISO title, and that company will give it to you, and you have a good relationship with the CIO. You've met, you've interviewed, they understand, they support. You recognize that you're going to be a little limited. You recognize that you're basically fighting with one arm behind your back. You realize that you're not in the best ideal position, but you are willing to do it for 12 to 18 months to get experience, to get your battle scars, and most importantly, to get what everybody wants, which is those 4 letters on your CV. I was and I am a CISO. As long as you're going into it, now I wouldn't tell the company this, but if that's in your mindset that, okay, I'm willing to do this, recognize it's not ideal, recognize it's going to be frustrating, but recognize it's a great way to get experience, and I will get what I want, which is I finally can put CISO on my CV, and then in a year and a half, I'm going to look for another job, then I think that's okay. But if you are a seasoned CISO and you are looking to promote, move up, and go to a bigger company, and you are currently a CISO that reports to the exec, and you're moving to a company where the CISO is buried under the CIO, I would say unless there's a really, really important valid reason for it, I would say no. Because your probability of being successful is very small. And here's the kicker. Oh, but Eric, me and the CIO get along really well. They give me freedoms. They let me brief the board. Great. What happens when they get replaced? What happens when a new CIO comes into place? So you're basically basing your success not on anything that's set in stone, not any org structure, not anything guaranteed, but based on the personality of an individual that can be replaced at any moment. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying eyes wide open. Be aware and recognize that that's a challenge. Next issue. Next issue is many CISOs, because they come from a security engineer background and they're very smart and they believe that they know the right solution, when they go to brief executives, they don't brief risk, they don't brief business, they brief what they believe is the best option. Basically, they've picked a dog in the fight, they decided on what solution they're going to go down, and that's the only option they present to the execs. So you might have seen something similar, but you have a CISO go to the board going, we need to spend $400K to protect against ransomware. Otherwise, we're going to have a ransom attack and things are going to be really bad. And what usually happens there? The execs are like, yeah, nah. We didn't spend $400K for the last 6 months and we didn't get hit with ransomware. And guess what? In 6 months, we're going to meet with you. We're not going to get hit with ransomware. We're going to be like, we told you you were wrong. Now, here's the problem. Because that CISO picked a dog in the fight and made it an absolute, they've almost set themselves up for failure because execs just don't believe them. So here's the correct way of doing it. CISOs need to recognize that cyber is a business problem. They need to recognize that it's risk-based, and they need to present options. Here's how I present to boards. Listen, based on the industry you're in, based on what's been happening, what's occurring, and what we know about the threat that's out there of your data potentially being taken control of and held ransom, based on all the best estimate we have, it's about an 85% chance that over the next year you will get hit with a ransomware attack. If that happens, it will cost you $12 million in ransom recovery, damages, fines, and everything else. And there is a solution to fix it or minimize that risk, but it will cost you $400K. Mr. and Mrs. Executives, what would you like to do? Now, honestly, I don't care. Because I understand that running a business is risk, and I understand that cyber is a business decision. So guess what? There's possibilities. I see companies all the time that take ridiculous risk. If you look at Tesla, before Tesla rolled out a single car, do you know how much risk Elon Musk took? Elon Musk basically bet everything on the success of Tesla. And there were some moments, if you really followed Tesla and the rollout, there were some moments of truth where it was close to not having Tesla. And Elon could have lost everything. But he knows that's how you grow That's how you become one of the richest people in the world, and that's how you become a multi-billionaire, by taking very, very high calculated risks on things you believe for. So it's okay if a company tells me, Eric, we're willing to take that risk. We hear what you're saying, and we know ransomware is real. We see it all the time. Our executive friends talk about it all the time. We know it's an 85% chance, and we know that if it happens, it will cost us about $12 million. However, based on where we're at with the business, what we're doing, our budgets and other factors, we just cannot spend the money, and we are willing to accept that risk. From a CISO perspective, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. And here's why. Because that's all your job is. As long as the company understands the risk and willing to accept it, you are doing your job as a security professional. This is why world-class security engineers make awful CISOs. Because I'll tell you, a world-class security engineer cannot swallow that pill. They can't. A world-class security engineer doesn't understand business. They only understand security, and they cannot understand for the life of them, and it will make them nuts, on how in the world could a company know that there's a huge risk, high probability of occurring, significant amount of money to the company, and in light of that, not spend the money to fix it. They just can't understand it because they don't understand business, and they don't understand there's limited resources. You can't spend money on every risk, and you can't live risk-free. You have to accept risks. So world-class CISOs know that, and they always present options. When I present to executives, I never give them a single option. I give them the entire option, and if they either accept the risk, mitigate the risk, or take other action, but they are fully aware, eyes wide open, I did my job. And that's how you have to view it. Cybersecurity is about making sure companies understand and accept the risk. There's risk posture. And as long as we are doing that, we are winning in this game called cybersecurity. So, most important thing, as a CISO, you need to make sure that everyone is trained, all executives are trained in the business to realize that cybersecurity is a business decision based on risk, and here's how it works. Cybersecurity is the simplest thing. I always laugh when companies struggle and CISOs get stressed out and security engineers are freaking out and threatening to quit and everything else. And I'm like, this is not difficult. People. Why are we making this so hard? It's really, really simple. When we're going to make a decision, I want you to answer for one question. What is the value or benefit? So we want to deploy this new system. We want to purchase a new company. We want whatever it is that everyone's freaking out and making it so complicated. I just want you to tell me in a sentence, what is the value or benefit of doing this? I'll give you 2 sentences. I won't give you 15 minutes. Because the reality is, if it's a real opportunity to the business, you can describe it in 1 to 2 sentences. So I want to know very clear and concise, what is the value or benefit? What is the value or benefit of doing this? Great. Now, 1 or 2 sentences, what are the risks in doing this? What is the risk factor in doing this? Is it our data could be exposed? We can be fined millions or billions of dollars. We can have to pay a ransom of what is the risk or exposure? And once again, this is the difference between average and world-class CISOs. Average CISOs can't do that. They just, pardon the analogy, but it's the best one. They get diarrhea of the mouth. No, stop. People stopped listening 30 seconds ago. You should too. what makes me so valuable and why companies bring me in is because I can take any risk, look at it, categorize it, look for patterns, and describe it in one sentence or two. Boom. That's what a world-class CISO does. Then, cybersecurity is easy. You have a description of the value or benefit. You have a description of the risk and exposure. Simple. Is the value and benefit worth the risk or exposure? Is the value you're getting, that value that you described in one or two sentences, is that greater to you and more important to you than this risk that we outlined? If yes, do it. If no, don't. And that, in a box, with a note, a bow, and even a card, is cybersecurity. And I know people always go and go, Eric, you make it sound so simple. Because it is. Oh, but Eric, it's not that simple. It is. When you're looking at business level decisions and you're looking at chief officers in an organization, this is why CISOs struggle. Because they don't want to give up the complexity. They don't want to give up the technology. They don't want to give up their role as a world-class security engineer. But the reality is, running a business, even if we take security out of play, executives that run a business get paid the big bucks because they make the big decisions. And even not in security, they're always looking at what is the value and benefit, what is the negative, what is the positive, what is the negative, however you want to look at it, what is the upside, what is the downside. We can use all different terms, but that's what being an executive is all about. When an executive decides to buy a company for $3 billion, I'm on an Elon Musk kick. So when Elon Musk decided to buy Twitter, whatever multiple billion, at some level, he did an analysis. What is the upside of doing this? What is the downside of doing this? And at some level, he decided that the upside was greater than the downside, so he decided to make the deal. Same thing with the people selling it. Upside, downside. That's business. So all we're doing is taking the structure of how businesses run and function and fitting it into a cybersecurity model so CISOs can be successful, understanding it's a business problem. And yes, there's work, there's research, there's a lot more behind it. But at the end of the day, if you do the work, you do the research, you do everything you're supposed to, being a CISO ultimately comes down to presenting to executives, here is value and benefit, here is risk and exposure, and do we think the value and benefit exceeds the risk and exposure? Now, when you truly get the chief officer status, so you are truly a chief information security officer where the CNO is bigger than the INS, the only thing that shifts is you make a recommendation. Here's the upside. Here's the value and benefit. Here's the downside, the risk and exposure. I personally, as a chief officer, think we should do X, but I just want you to recognize the two sides so you can either agree or disagree with my decision. Now notice, it's different than what I said before. We're picking a dog in the fight. I'm not going in and saying we should do X. I'm going in and I'm presenting all the data. I'm presenting the upside and downside. And now because I'm trusted and I'm one of the 5 top executives at the company, I get an opinion. And now after all the data is presented and all the information is laid out, here's my opinion. But if you have a different opinion, I would definitely respect that. That's how you take cybersecurity from a technical problem and you turn it into a business problem.